Imagine a quiet, respectable postman, a man who delivers your mail every day. Now, imagine him living with the headless body of his girlfriend for nearly 2 days, while sending texts from her phone, pretending she's still alive. This isn't fiction. This is the chilling reality of Ewan Mathan and the tragic case of Phoenix Spencer Horn. We're heading to East Kilbride, Scotland. Just 10 miles south of Glasgow, it was once a beacon of idealism. Scotland's first official new town, planned in 1947 to ease post-war overcrowding. Think leafy suburbs, neat shopping centers, a model of modern living. For many, that vision still holds true. It's a family-oriented place, home to over 75,000 people. But like all towns born from idealism, East Kilbride has its shadows, and it's seen darkness before. Back in 2005, this very town was thrust into the national spotlight when police discovered the body of Vicky Hamilton, buried in a back garden. Her killer was Peter Tobin, later unmasked as one of the UK's most prolific serial murderers. That case shook East Kilbride to its core, and in the decades that followed, the town saw a slow, steady rise in domestic and drug-related violence. It was here, on a quiet residential street named Glen Lee, that 21-year-old Phoenix Spencer Horn lived with her 27-year-old partner, Ewan Mathan. Phoenix, born in 2003, was the youngest of 4 children from Strathaven. Her family was close-knit, loving, and grounded. Her parents, Allison and Graham, raised their children with strong values, and Phoenix embodied them all. Even as a child, she stood out. It wasn't just her looks. It was her spirit. She was bright, warm, and full of quiet compassion. The kind of person who noticed when someone was struggling and instinctively stepped in to help. At Strathaven Academy, she was known for her kindness, humor, and incredible empathy. Teachers remembered her not just for her hard work, but for making others feel seen. After school, Phoenix threw herself into the adult world. She worked at the local Strathaven Hotel, served coffee at a cafe, and by all accounts, made it look effortless. Colleagues and managers respected her. Customers adored her. Outside of work, her life was sweet and simple. She prioritized her family, loved music, long walks in the countryside, and, like many in their 20s, posted videos to TikTok. Her account was filled with happy moments, ice cream with friends, golden hour selfies, goofy snaps with her siblings. She was balancing jobs, enjoying her freedom, and shaping her future. And then she met Ewan Mathan. Ewan Mathan was 27 years old. He grew up in Strathaven, just a few miles from East Kilbride, living with his family and attending local schools. As an adult, he worked as a postman for Royal Mail, a quiet, dependable job that, by many accounts, he did well. To those who knew him casually, Ewan seemed sociable, popular, yet a little shy. When Phoenix first met him in late 2022, he came across as gentle and reserved. The kind of man who didn't say much in crowds, but showed a softer, more thoughtful side behind closed doors. Phoenix was 20, Ewan 25. They seemed like total opposites. Phoenix full of light and laughter. Ewan was Ewan. But sometimes that contrast draws people together. Friends described Phoenix as gentle, funny, and fiercely loyal. She was the kind of person who just knew if you needed a hug. On the surface, they seemed a good match. She was studying and working part-time. He had a steady job. Phoenix brought energy and color into his life, making him try new things, bringing him out of his shell. And Ewan, at least initially, seemed charming. He made a good impression on her family, and her friends even described him as attentive, loving, and doting. Everything Phoenix shared suggested she loved him to the moon and back. But there was another side to Ewan, one that few people saw. Beneath that charm, several neighbors recalled flashes of anger. A certain deadness in his stare when his expression slipped. And for those who had scrolled through his social media, the signs were even harder to ignore. From the age of 14 to 18, he posted a string of troubling messages online. His tone was violent, angry, and deeply misogynistic. In one post, he wrote, "It's kill or be killed." And in one of the most disturbing, he described wanting to kick her big, horrible effing teeth out. This wasn't just one or two posts. There were dozens. Ewan even described himself as a local drug dealer and occasional porn star. He'd boast about how anger made him feel tingly and agitated. Those posts were eventually deleted, scrubbed from the internet. But they weren't forgotten by all who had seen them. Ewan's online facade revealed a teen consumed by violence and ego. A walking red flag. Yet, fast forward a few years, and he was quietly working at Royal Mail, keeping to himself, doing his rounds without complaint. Quite the plot twist. A few months after they met, Phoenix and Ewan moved into a small, rented flat in East Kilbride. From the outside, everything still seemed dandy. They celebrated birthdays, took photos, visited family every week, just another couple figuring life out. But behind the scenes, things were far from straightforward. Over time, Ewan slowly started to change. It didn't happen all at once. It crept in. At first, it was little things. Offhand criticisms, moodiness, sulking when things didn't go his way. Then came the jealousy, not just over her friends or who she spoke to, but even over her job and the way she dressed. Phoenix, being the empathetic person she was, desperately tried to calm him. But the cracks just kept widening. His insecurities deepened, and Ewan became volatile. Phoenix never made a big scene. Instead, she quietly opened up to friends, letting them know things weren't working. By mid-2024, she had finally made up her mind. She wanted space from Ewan. She was ready to move on, but Ewan would not take that rejection well. He had what he thought was the perfect excuse. He claimed he wasn't a bad guy, just a poor victim to cocaine, steroids, and alcohol. He promised that once he had his addictions under control, everything would change. He used these vices as excuses rather than seeking real change. And Phoenix, ever patient, ever compassionate, believed him. By November 2024, they had lived together for nearly 2 years. And tragically, Ewan was slipping deeper into substance abuse, emotional volatility, and a desperate need for control. He felt stagnant in his mundane job, caught in cycles of dependency. Phoenix, with her kindness and compassion, remained. It would prove to be her ultimate betrayal. The date was Saturday, November 16th, 2024. Phoenix had finished her shift at the Strathaven Hotel and returned home to Ewan. He had spent the afternoon alone and messaged her, saying he was feeling lonely. Phoenix replied with warmth, promising they'd be together soon. Later that evening, they shared a takeaway in front of the TV. From the outside, it looked like a normal, quiet night in. At 9:37 p.m., Phoenix messaged her mother, Allison, to say they were having dinner at home. The message was short, casual, hinting that nothing was wrong. But sadly, only a few hours later, everything would change. It was just after midnight. Neighbors downstairs heard loud noises and hurried footsteps echoing from above. An odd energy, out of place for a normal weekend evening. But just as quickly as those strange noises began, silence suddenly followed. And I'm talking about absolute silence. Not only from the apartment, but from Phoenix's phone. As the night continued, she wouldn't respond to any phone calls or text messages. The rest of the night passed undisturbed. The flat stayed dark. Her phone stayed silent. It was only the following morning, on Sunday, November 17th, when Phoenix still hadn't replied, that Allison began to grow cautious. She messaged her daughter, asking if she was okay. She eventually received a message back, but it was short and completely out of character. "Sorry, I've just woken up." Ewan himself also exchanged messages with Allison. He claimed that he and Phoenix had simply been drunk that night, and that her daughter was still asleep. Again, concerning. This wasn't like Phoenix. Her family were worried, yes, but they figured she might just need time to nurse her hangover. And so the rest of the day slid by without much more investigation. But when Phoenix failed to turn up for her shift at work the following day, Monday, November 18th, that's when her family became truly worried. No surprise, they contacted the authorities. At 12:10 p.m., just after noon, officers arrived at the flat on Glen Lee. They were there to find Phoenix, but it was Ewan who answered the door. He appeared calm, collected, eerily quiet, as usual. He invited the officers in, and once they stepped inside, what they found was nothing short of horrific. The smell of copper filled the hallway. Police officers immediately spotted a naked body lying in the room, partially covered by a tea towel. They could instantly tell that Phoenix had suffered extreme mutilation. Her head had been severed, and it had been placed upright beneath her left arm, next to her torso. Taking a look around the property, it appeared Ewan had tried to dismember her. 2 bloodied knives were found near her body, with a third, also stained, discovered in the bedroom. Officers noted the scene was brutal, intimate, and unflinchingly violent. And even stranger throughout it all, Ewan remained composed. He answered all their questions with full transparency, without any resistance. When they asked him why he did such a thing, he bluntly said that he couldn't stay in the flat with a full body, which is why he tried to dismember her. This chilling flatness, spoken without any panic or remorse, left the detectives truly horrified. And the worst part? Ewan didn't seem to care. At one point, he even turned to an officer and said, "I guess this is what my next 25 years look like." Our postman was swiftly arrested and delivered straight to a jail cell. Express delivery included, forensic investigators sealed the scene, documenting every inch. They looked at Phoenix's body placement, the knife positions, all stages of decomposition. Tragically, the report concluded Phoenix had been stabbed more than 20 times, many of those straight to the face. Despite these horrific wounds, it was a single stab to the chest that likely killed her. Even after his arrest, Ewan couldn't stop talking. He told officers he had blacked out during a drug-fueled episode. He suggested steroids, cocaine, and alcohol all played a role. At no point did he deny responsibility. Instead, he seemed fixated on painting himself as a broken man, fractured by substance abuse and deep-seated emotions. And as it turns out, this wasn't his first confession that day. Only moments before police came knocking, Ewan had dialed 911 himself. On the call, he calmly told the operator that he had murdered his girlfriend. When asked if he was sure she was dead, he responded, "I know she is dead, mate. She is dead. I even tried to dismember her." So, what really happened that fateful night? According to Ewan and the forensic evidence, it was shortly after midnight, and without warning, he suddenly launched himself on Phoenix. There was no apparent cause or commotion. He just merely wanted to kill her. After jumping on top of her, she was strangled before then being stabbed more than 20 times. At 12:13 a.m., a downstairs neighbor reported hearing a loud bang followed by a series of footsteps overhead. By then, it was already too late. Phoenix was gone. But what followed next was almost unbelievable. Alone in the flat, Ewan placed her body in the bathtub. He retrieved 3 knives from the kitchen and then, in unimaginable horror, removed her head. By morning, the place they had once called home was no longer recognizable. The silence that followed was only interrupted by the sound of Ewan pacing the apartment. No cries for help, no calls to emergency services, no screams of regret. This was now merely a flat soaked in horror, and a killer left alone with what he had done. When Phoenix's family eventually grew concerned, Ewan pretended to be her, texting her mother as if nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, only a few meters away, her lifeless body lay helplessly on the floor. Over the course of that Sunday, Ewan's behavior became even more disturbing. It's crazy to say, because you'd think it would stop at murder. But seriously, it became far worse. Between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. that day, he used Phoenix's phone to watch adult content. Not just once or twice, but more than 170 times over 10 hours. He watched hundreds of these videos, all while his girlfriend's body lay on the floor next to him. I genuinely don't think you can be more disgusting. That level of crossover, at that intensity, is absolutely haunting. Later that day, halfway through this horrific marathon, he even ordered drugs to his flat. Surveillance cameras around town would later record him behind the wheel of Phoenix's red Vauxhall Corsa. He left the apartment at least once, most likely to find a local drug dealer and seek ways to dispose of the evidence. It was clear he was making calculated decisions to rid himself of her death, all while trying to binge himself on another high. Meanwhile, concern was rapidly growing within the family. When Phoenix didn't show up for work the day after, colleagues from Strathaven Hotel reached out to her parents. It was in that moment they finally had enough. Already suspicious, Allison phoned the police. This call, paired with Ewan's own confession call, would mark the end of this terrible mystery. It was clear that up until that moment, Ewan had done everything in his power to delay his capture. From forging text messages, to watching hours of pornography, right through to crude attempts at making it easier to move her body. It was only when he realized he could no longer evade the inevitable that he finally dialed 911. Ewan's arrest marked the beginning of a complex and deeply disturbing investigation. Although he had confessed at the crime scene and during his phone call to the police, detectives still had to piece everything together. Forensic teams spent hours in that flat, gathering evidence. Phoenix's family were informed that, tragically, her body had been found, and they haven't been the same ever since. Only 2 days later, Ewan appeared in court for the first time. He was charged with murder and attempting to defeat the ends of justice. He made no plea and no apology and was remanded in custody. Due to the brutality of the case, it was quickly moved to the High Court in Glasgow. Prosecutors built their case in the months that followed, gathering evidence from autopsy reports, digital forensics, witness testimonies, and detailed crime scene analysis. Fast forward half a year, and on June 17, 2025, Ewan was finally ready to stand trial. The room was filled with reporters, onlookers, and grieving family members. Ewan stood motionless in the dock as prosecutors laid out the charges in graphic detail. They told the court that Phoenix had been strangled, stabbed repeatedly, and then decapitated. It was also detailed that he watched porn over 170 times, and blasted his way through drugs and alcohol, while her dead, naked body lay merely meters away from him. With so much against him, Ewan knew there was no chance of him walking away. And so, with that in mind, he pleaded guilty to both charges. The prosecution argued that his actions had been driven by jealousy, possessiveness, and long-term substance abuse. But the main thing that stood out was how calculated he had been after the fact. They claimed this wasn't some sort of freak madness or accident, but a series of cold, chilling decisions. Interestingly, his defense team didn't try to dispute the facts either. Instead, Ewan's lawyer claimed his client had suffered an emotional and psychological breakdown and had no memory of the murder. Now, this is the bit that truly gets me. His very own lawyer would say that almost everyone would see him as the personification of evil. When your own defense lawyer sees you that way, well, you know you're pretty much stuffed. Even still, the court was not swayed by claims of a blackout. The evidence told a different story. As the final arguments were laid bare, the courtroom sat in suffocating stillness. The judge had heard it all: the brutality, the aftermath, and all of the lies. With Ewan's guilty plea accepted, all that remained was his final sentencing. On July 14th, 2025, that day finally came. The judge described the killing as truly dreadful and condemned Ewan for betraying the trust of someone who had considered him family. For his crimes, Ewan was handed a life sentence with a minimum of 23 years before even being considered for parole. The judge noted that after the murder, he did not call for help or contact the authorities. Instead, he stayed in the flat for almost 48 hours, indulging in his many vices. This, of course, revealed a horrific lack of remorse or urgency. In his sentencing remarks, the judge simply said, "You robbed her of all dignity." The court also heard from Phoenix's family. They read out victim impact statements and voice recordings, describing the pain, heartbreak, and fury left behind, and the silence that now seems to swallow all of their lives. Phoenix Spencer Horn was only 21 years old when her life was taken from her, in one of the most horrific ways imaginable. She was young, full of promise, and held many dreams. After her death, tributes poured in, both online and in person. A memorial bench now stands in her hometown of Strathaven, where donations are raised in her name for Glasgow Women's Aid. Her family and friends remember her laugh, her loyalty, and her warmth. Perhaps the hardest question they still face is, how could someone so kind and so full of life find themselves living under the same roof as someone so dangerous? And how could those cheerful TikTok videos be so different from the grim reality? Phoenix and Ewan on social media looked like any other young couple, smiling in photos, sharing trips, posting the small, happy moments of daily life. From the outside, their relationship seemed ordinary. But as we found out, those filtered snapshots barely even told part of the story. Behind the scenes, Ewan was struggling with jealousy, insecurity, and a desperate need for control. And Phoenix, with her kindness, tried to carry that burden quietly. And I suppose that's one of the many dangers of curating your life on social media. Because then, all of the lies, jealousy, and hatred are hidden right behind those few pixels. Phoenix's story is a devastating reminder that serious issues can always be hiding in plain sight, and that even the people who seem to be the happiest can actually be suffering behind closed doors. It brings me back to that very uncomfortable truth about social media. How even those carefully curated images can actually be covering up real danger. What do you think, folks? How can we spot the warning signs when they're hidden so carefully? And what does this case tell us about the faces people show to the world? versus the darkness they hide behind closed doors? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.